Hello, I'm Too Tight Lautrec. Welcome. Welcome. Welcome to my opening. Hello, I'm Too Tight Lautrec. Welcome to my opening, where I serve as your very own personal shopper for literary fiction by reading the opening passages of books that I recommend for one reason or another. Are you looking maybe for a nice beach read? Then I recommend Wittgenstein's Mistress by David Markson, if only because most of the action takes place on a beach. It seems to be about a woman who is all alone in the world. She's the last person on Earth. She lives in her very own sub basement with nobody else around, no one to bother her. Or does she? Let me confer with my notes for a moment. David Markson is considered an experimental novelist, but really aren't all novels experiments? I'm just saying. David Markson was born December 20th, 1927 in Albany, New York, and he died January 4th, 2010 in New York City. David Markson is saddled with the label of experimental novelist because his later novels don't have the normal earmarks of plot and character development that traditional novels seem to have. Wittgenstein's Mistress proceeds through a series of statements giving direction, misdirection. One fact is contradicted by the following fact, until what we have is this tremendously haunting conglomerate of statements, and you end up wondering what exactly is going on. Although David Markson's later novels are categorized as experimental fiction, he actually started writing in the 1950s, and he wrote a series of detective stories, crime novels, detective stories, that were quite popular but really didn't make his name for him. It wasn't until he was past 60 that he became more widely known. He actually said that one of my friends told me to be careful before I become well known for being unknown. Wittgenstein's Mistress was published in 1988 by Dalkey Archive Press after being rejected 56 times. David Markson died in his West Village apartment in 2010, and according to his wishes, his entire library was donated to where? His local bookstore, the Strand Bookstore to be exact, on Broadway and East 12th Street. My kind of guy. Another my kind of guy. Wittgenstein's Mistress by David Markson. In the beginning, sometimes I left messages in the street. Somebody is living in the Louvre, certain of the messages would say, or in the National Gallery. Naturally, they could only say that when I was in Paris or in London. Somebody is living in the Metropolitan Museum, being what they would say when I was still in New York. Nobody came, of course. Eventually, I stopped leaving the messages. To tell the truth, perhaps I left only 3 or 4 messages altogether. I have no idea how long ago it was when I was doing that. If I were forced to guess, I believe I would guess 10 years. Possibly it was several years longer than that, however. And of course I was quite out of my mind for a certain period too, back then. I do not know for how long a period, but for a certain period. Time out of mind. Which is a phrase I suspect I may have never properly understood, now that I happen to use it. Time out of mind meaning mad, or time out of mind meaning simply forgotten. But in either case, there was little question about that madness. As when I drove that time to that obscure corner of Turkey, for instance, to visit the site of ancient Troy. and for some reason wished especially to look at the river there, that I had read about as well, flowing past the citadel to the sea. I have forgotten the name of the river, which was actually a muddy stream. And at any rate, I do not mean the sea, but to the Dardanelles, which used to be called the Hellespont. The name of Troy had been changed too, naturally, Hisarlik being what it was changed to. In many ways, my visit was a disappointment, the site being astonishingly small, like little more than your ordinary city block, and a few stories in height, practically. Still, from the ruins one could see Mount Ida, all of that distance away. Even in late spring, there was snow on the mountain. Somebody went there to die, I believe, in one of the old stories. Paris, perhaps. I mean the Paris who had been Helen's lover, naturally, and who was wounded quite near the end of that war. As a matter of fact, it was Helen I mostly thought about when I was at Troy. I was about to add that I even dreamed for a while that the Greek ships were beached there still. Well, it would have been a harmless enough thing to dream. From Hisarlik, the water is perhaps an hour's walk away. What I had planned to do next was to take an ordinary rowboat across and then drive on into Europe through Yugoslavia. Possibly, I mean, Yugoslavia. In any case, on that side of the channel, there are monuments to the soldiers who died there in the First World War. On the side where Troy is, one can find a monument where Achilles was buried so much longer ago. Well, they say it's where Achilles was buried. Still, I find it extraordinary that young men died there in a war that long ago, and then died in the same place 3,000 years after that. But be that as it may, I changed my mind about crossing the Hellespont, by which I mean the Dardanelles. What I did was pick out a motor launch and go by way of the Greek islands and Athens instead. Even with only a page torn out of an atlas instead of maritime charts, it took me only 2 unhurried days to get to Greece. A good deal about that ancient war was doubtless greatly exaggerated. Still, certain things can touch a chord. Such as, for instance, a day or two after that, seeing the Pantheon by the late afternoon sun. It was that winter during which I lived in the Louvre, I believe, burning artifacts and picture frames for warmth in a poorly ventilated room. But then, with the first signs of thaw, switching vehicles whenever I ran low on gas, started back across central Russia to make my way home again. All of this being indisputably true, if, as I say, long ago. And if, as I also say, I may well have been mad. Then again, I am not at all certain I was mad when I drove to Mexico before that. Possibly before that. To visit at the grave of a child I had lost, even longer ago than all of this, named Adam. Why have I written that his name was Adam? Simon is what my little boy was named. Time out of mind. Meaning that one can even momentarily forget the name of one's only child, who would be 30 by now? I doubt 30. Say 26 or 27. Am I 50 then? There is only one mirror here in this house on this beach. Perhaps the mirror says 50. So that's the beginning of Wittgenstein's Mistress. Haunting and beautiful. I highly recommend it. Go to your local bookstore, chat up your local librarian. Go to the Strand bookstore and maybe you can find one of David Markson's own books there and buy something else while you're there besides this fantastic book. Meanwhile, pay attention to whatever world you live in, and you'll see that it's full of wonder. Subscribe, like, and share the video, or subscribe for a friend, or for someone sort of a dim-witted enemy that you don't really like very much, just to give them a nice little surprise. In any case, pay attention to your world. Until we meet again, I'm Too Tight Lautrec. Mwah.